there. Ready to dive into something pretty fascinating.
Always.
So you wanted a clear understanding of competency development, right? Particularly in like training and development.
Yeah, that's
And you know what? You actually provided a textbook chapter that really digs into it. So let's get to it. I think this is interesting stuff.
okay. Sounds good.
Because, we all want to be more competent, right? Whether it's at work, in our personal projects, or even just navigating daily life.
Yeah.
So this chapter covers a lot, from what competency actually is, all the way to how to measure it, how to build training programs around it. There's even a case study to see it all in action.
Okay. Wow.
To help us unpack all of this and really get the most out of this chapter, I've invited an expert in learning and development to join us. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm excited. I think we'll uncover some real gems in this chapter.
I think so too.
Yeah.
So, the chapter starts by defining competency.
Right.
And I have to admit, it immediately challenged my assumptions. I always thought it was just about skills, but it turns out it's so much more than that.
It really is.
Right.
The textbook defines competency as a blend of skills, knowledge, abilities, and get this, behaviors.
Oh, okay.
And it's that last part, the behaviors, that I find most intriguing.
Really? Why is that? What makes the behavioral aspect of competency so important?
Well, think about it this way. You can have all the technical skills in the world,
Right.
but if you can't communicate effectively, collaborate with your team, or adapt to changing circumstances, those skills might not translate into real-world success. Those behaviors are what bridge the gap between knowing something and actually being able to apply it effectively.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's like having all the ingredients for a gourmet meal but not knowing how to cook, right?
Yeah.
The potential is there, but without the right process and execution, you won't get the desired outcome. So the chapter gives an example that really hit home for me. Imagine a software developer who writes amazing code, super talented,
Right.
but can't communicate with their team, misses deadlines constantly, and struggles to take feedback. Are they truly competent in their role?
That's a great question. I think that's a really great question.
Yeah.
And it highlights the importance of those behavioral competencies. In that scenario, even with exceptional technical skills, the developer's lack of communication, teamwork, and time management skills would likely hinder their overall success, and potentially the team's as well.
Right. Yeah.
So you could argue that they're not fully competent in their role, despite having the raw talent.
That's interesting. Okay, so competency is this complex mix of skills, knowledge, abilities, and behaviors. But why should we, as individuals, care about competency development?
Oh, there's so many reasons why understanding competency is beneficial. But I think one of the most compelling arguments is its impact on training and development.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Well, chapter dives into this, explaining that competency models can make training way more effective. Instead of just throwing random courses at people, you can actually tailor development to the specific competencies someone needs to excel in their role. That seems so much more efficient and targeted.
Exactly. And it moves us away from that one-size-fits-all approach to training that we've seen for so long. It's about creating personalized learning experiences that address individual needs and goals.
So how does all of this play out in the real world? How do organizations actually go about building these competency-based training programs?
Ooh, that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
The chapter outlines a step-by-step process, and one of the key takeaways is that these programs are incredibly performance-oriented.
So meaning they're focused on achieving measurable outcomes, not just ticking boxes, right?
Yeah.
I remember that being a key point in the chapter. It also mentioned that competency-based training programs can be adapted to each employee's unique needs.
Exactly. Imagine a training program that knows exactly what you need to succeed in your specific role and provides you with personalized learning paths and resources. No more wasting time on irrelevant content or generic courses.
That sounds amazing. But here's a question that popped into my mind as I was reading this chapter.
Okay, yeah.
It's all well and good to talk about competency, but how do you actually measure it?
Yeah, it's the million-dollar question. And it's where things can get a little tricky.
Because it's not always obvious, right?
Yeah.
You can't just look at someone and say, yep, you're definitely competent in leadership, or you've mastered communication skills.
Precisely. Competency is often demonstrated through a combination of observable behaviors and measurable outcomes,
Right.
which requires a more nuanced approach to assessment.
The chapter mentions several different methods for measuring competency, and honestly, it was a bit overwhelming at first glance.
Okay.
There are self-assessments, manager assessments, peer reviews, 360-degree feedback, competency-based interviews, and even assessments based on observing someone's actual work. It's a lot to take in.
It can be. But the key is to remember that each method has its own strengths and limitations.
So instead of relying on just one method, it's better to use a combination of them, like a detective gathering evidence from different sources.
Exactly. And that's a great way to think about it. By using multiple methods, you get a more holistic and reliable picture of someone's true competencies.
Now, I know we're about to get into the nitty-gritty of measuring competency in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
But before we do, I want to shift gears for a moment and introduce you to GlobalTech.
Ah, yes, the case study.
Yeah.
I was wondering when we get to that.
It's a fictional company featured in the chapter, but it feels incredibly relevant to today's business world.
Yeah.
GlobalTech is this cutting-edge tech company with a global reach.
Right.
And they're facing some real challenges as they try to keep pace with rapid growth.
It's a classic scenario, actually.
Yeah.
Companies are expanding rapidly, but they're struggling to ensure their employees have the skills and competencies needed to support that growth.
And GlobalTech is no exception. They're realizing that they need a more strategic approach to training and development, one that's focused on building the specific competencies that will drive their success.
And that's where competency-based training and development comes in.
Yeah,
the case study is a fantastic way to see these concepts come to life. GlobalTech realizes they need a competency-based approach.
Right.
But they aren't sure where to start.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Sound familiar to anyone?
Totally. It's like having all these puzzle pieces.
Right.
But no picture to guide you.
Yeah.
So how does GlobalTech start putting the pieces together? What are the first steps in building a competency-based program?
Well, the chapter highlights a few key tasks.
Okay.
The first is to identify the organization's strategic goals.
Okay.
What are they trying to achieve? Where do they want to be in the next 5 years?
Okay, so it's about understanding the big picture, the company's vision for the future.
Right.
That makes sense. But how do they translate those goals into specific competencies?
That's where job analysis comes in. They need to look at each role within the organization and determine the specific skills, knowledge, abilities, and behaviors needed for that role to contribute to those overarching strategic goals.
So it's not just about generic job descriptions anymore. It's about really understanding how each role fits into the larger puzzle of the organization's success.
Absolutely. And once those competencies are defined for each role, GlobalTech can start developing targeted training programs to cultivate those competencies in their employees.
I'm seeing how this aligns with what we talked about earlier about moving away from that one-size-fits-all approach to training. By understanding the specific competencies needed for each role, GlobalTech can create learning experiences that are much more relevant and impactful.
Exactly. And it allows them to be more strategic with their training budget and resources, focusing on developing the competencies that will have the greatest impact on their bottom line.
Now, before we get too carried away with GlobalTech's transformation, let's circle back to the different methods for measuring competency. I think understanding those is key to really grasping how a competency-based approach works in practice.
You're right. It's important to remember that competency assessment isn't a one-time event. It's an ongoing process that should be integrated into all aspects of training and development.
The chapter certainly emphasized that point. It mentions several different methods for assessing competency. And I have to admit, I'm still wrapping my head around all of them.
Let's break them down one by one. We can start with one that's probably familiar to most people: self-assessment.
Self-assessment. That sounds pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
You basically ask people to reflect on their own strengths and weaknesses related to a particular competency, right?
Exactly. It's about encouraging self-awareness and getting individuals to think critically about their own abilities and areas where they might need further development.
But isn't there a risk of bias with self-assessments? People might overestimate their skills or downplay their weaknesses, especially if they think it might affect their performance reviews or something.
That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
That's why self-assessments are most effective when used as part of a multifaceted assessment process. They're a great starting point, but they shouldn't be the only source of information.
Makes sense. So what are some other methods that could be used in conjunction with self-assessments to get a more well-rounded picture of someone's competency?
Well, manager assessments are another common method. This involves the manager observing the employee's performance and providing feedback on their demonstrated competencies.
That sounds logical, but couldn't there be bias there too? What if a manager plays favorites or has a personality clash with an employee?
You're hitting on a crucial point.
Yeah.
To minimize bias, it's important to have clear competency definitions and performance standards in place.
Okay.
Managers should be trained to assess employees objectively, focusing on specific behaviors and outcomes rather than personal preferences.
So it's like having a clear rubric for grading where everyone is evaluated against the same criteria.
Precisely.
That helps level the playing field?
And just like self-assessments, manager assessments are just one piece of the puzzle. To get a more complete picture,
Okay.
we can also look to peer assessments.
Peer assessments, those are interesting. It's like getting feedback from your colleagues, the people who work alongside you day in and day out. They'd have a unique perspective on your strengths and weaknesses, wouldn't they?
Absolutely. Peer assessments can be incredibly valuable because they provide insights that a manager might not always see.
Right.
They can highlight how someone contributes to teamwork, communication, and conflict resolution, for example.
I can see how that would be helpful, but wouldn't it require a certain level of trust and openness within the team for peer assessments to be truly effective?
You're spot on. For peer assessments to work, there needs to be a culture of psychological safety,
Right.
where people feel comfortable providing honest feedback without fear of repercussions.
Yeah.
Anonymity can also be helpful in ensuring candid responses.
Speaking of getting feedback from multiple sources, the chapter also mentioned 360-degree feedback.
Yeah.
I've heard that term thrown around a lot, but I'm not entirely sure what it entails. Can you shed some light on that?
Of course. 360-degree feedback takes the concept of multi-source feedback to the next level.
Okay.
It involves gathering input from a variety of stakeholders, including the individual's manager, peers, subordinates if they have any, and even external parties like clients or vendors.
Wow, that's a lot of feedback. I imagine it could be overwhelming for the person receiving it.
It can be, but the benefit is that it provides a very comprehensive and well-rounded view of the individual's competencies. It helps identify blind spots, areas for development, and even hidden strengths that the person might not be aware of.
Okay, so we've got self-assessments, manager assessments, peer assessments, and 360-degree feedback. Those all seem to focus on gathering feedback from different perspectives.
Yeah, but the chapter also mentioned methods that involve actually observing someone's work or performance.
Right. Observation and work samples are two methods that provide more tangible evidence of competency.
So for observation, you'd actually be watching someone perform a task or interact with others to see how they apply their skills and knowledge in real time.
Exactly. This is particularly useful for assessing technical skills or competencies related to interpersonal interactions, like communication, teamwork, or conflict management.
And work samples would be things like reports, presentations, designs, or anything else that demonstrates a specific skill or competency.
Precisely. Work samples provide concrete evidence of someone's abilities,
Right.
which can be very powerful in assessing competency, especially when you combine them with other methods like observation or feedback from others.
It's starting to feel like we're building a case file,
Yeah.
gathering all these different pieces of evidence to determine someone's true level of competency. That's a great analogy. And just like in a real investigation, the more evidence you gather from different sources, the clearer the picture becomes.
So what about those big competency assessment centers I've heard about? Are those like the ultimate test of competency?
They can be. Assessment centers are like competency boot camps, where individuals are put through a series of exercises, simulations, and tests designed to evaluate multiple competencies simultaneously.
Boot camps. That sounds intense.
They can be, but they're also incredibly insightful.
Okay.
They're designed to simulate real-world work scenarios and challenge participants to demonstrate their skills and abilities under pressure.
Right.
It's like a one-stop shop for competency assessment.
I can see how that would be useful.
Yeah.
Especially for roles that require a high level of competency in multiple areas, or for identifying high potential employees for leadership development programs.
Exactly. But it's important to note that assessment centers can be resource intensive to develop and implement. They require careful planning, trained assessors, and a well-defined set of competencies to be evaluated.
So they're probably best suited for situations where the stakes are high and a comprehensive assessment is essential.
You got it. It's all about choosing the right tool for the job.
And it seems like there's no shortage of tools when it comes to competency assessment.
Right.
We've explored a whole range of methods, from introspective self-reflection to action-packed assessment centers.
Yeah.
It's clear that there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
And that's an important takeaway.
Right.
The most effective approach is to use a combination of methods tailored to the specific competencies being assessed and the context of the organization.
It's about finding the right fit, just like with any other tool or process.
Mm-hmm.
So now that we have a good understanding of the how of competency assessment, let's shift our focus to the why and explore the benefits of incorporating these methods into your training and development programs.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time unpacking the what and the how of competency assessment.
Yeah. But I think it's time we tackled the why.
Yeah.
What's the real payoff for organizations that embrace this approach? Why should they care about all of this?
You know, I'm glad you asked that because the benefits are pretty significant.
Okay.
One of the most immediate and tangible benefits is improved job performance.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you know what competencies are needed for a specific role and you focus on developing those competencies in your employees, you're likely to see a positive impact on their performance, right?
Exactly. It's about equipping employees with the skills and behaviors they need to excel in their roles, which leads to greater productivity, efficiency, and overall effectiveness.
But it's not just about ticking boxes and meeting basic job requirements. Right. The chapter touched on how competency development can also have a positive impact on employee engagement and motivation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. When employees feel confident in their abilities and they see a clear path for growth and development, they're more likely to be engaged, motivated, and invested in their work.
It's like that sense of purpose and mastery that we all crave.
Yeah.
Knowing that our work has value and that we're constantly learning and growing.
Precisely. And let's not forget about the impact on career development. Competency assessments can provide employees with a clear roadmap for advancement within the organization.
So instead of just hoping for the best or waiting for opportunities to fall into their lap, employees can take a proactive approach to their career growth.
Right.
Identifying the competencies they need to develop to reach their goals.
Exactly. And organizations can use competency frameworks to create structured career paths and development programs that support employees' aspirations.
Now, shifting gears a bit.
Okay.
The chapter also highlighted the benefits of competency assessments for organizations.
Yeah.
Particularly in the areas of recruitment and succession planning.
Yeah, those are two areas where a competency-based approach can be a real game changer. For recruitment, by clearly defining the competencies needed for various roles, organizations can streamline their hiring processes and attract candidates who are genuinely well-suited for those positions.
So instead of just looking at resumes and hoping for the best, organizations can be much more targeted in their search for talent, focusing on the specific skills and behaviors that are proven to drive success in their organization.
Exactly. And it helps potential candidates better understand what's expected of them.
Right.
Leading to a more qualified pool of applicants and a better fit between employees and their roles.
And when it comes to succession planning, competency assessments can help identify high-potential employees who are ready to step into leadership roles.
That's a key benefit. It allows organizations to be proactive rather than reactive in their leadership development efforts.
Right.
Instead of scrambling to fill a leadership vacancy when someone unexpectedly leaves or retires, they have a pipeline of talented individuals who are ready to take on new challenges.
Wow, the benefits just keep coming. Improved job performance, enhanced engagement, career development opportunities, streamlined recruitment, and strategic succession planning. It's clear that competency assessments are a powerful tool for any organization that's serious about developing its workforce.
It all boils down to alignment. Competency assessments help ensure that individual development efforts are directly tied to organizational goals.
Right.
Creating a win-win situation for everyone involved.
That's a fantastic way to sum it up. When everyone is on the same page, working towards a shared vision of success, and equipped with the right skills and behaviors to achieve those goals, the possibilities are limitless.
I completely agree. It's been a fascinating exploration of competency development.
Yeah, it has.
And I hope our listeners feeling inspired and empowered to apply these concepts to their own journey.
Me too. I know I've learned a lot from this deep dive. And speaking of learning, I want to leave our listener with a final thought to ponder.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about competencies in the workplace, but think about how this concept applies to other areas of your life.
Yeah.
What are the key competencies needed to be a successful parent, a supportive friend, a valuable member of your community? What skills, knowledge, abilities, and behaviors would help you excel in those roles? It's something to think about. A huge thank you to you, our expert, for sharing your expertise and helping us navigate the world of competency development. And to our listener, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.